It's July the 12th, 2014, and this is 508, a show about Worcester. I'm Mike Benedetti. Also on the show today is Brendan Milliken.
How's it going?
It's going okay. We're here in the beautiful Winslow Park at the corner of Winslow and Pleasant Street in Worcester. It's a nice summer evening here. This park is a nice park.
It's not very well populated right now.
It depends on the time of day. There's times when the park is a little on the crowded side. The park still never gets the kind of use you would think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we can go into that another show.
Sure.
It's been a couple months since we did a show.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. I also want to apologize to the people at home. I know you really missed watching this show. A ton of stuff happened. It was like the busiest 2 news months in Worcester of all time. And so it's definitely more than one show's worth of stuff. It's about 10 shows worth of stuff.
Yes.
In the coming weeks, we will have more shows where we bring you exciting guests and exciting locations. Today is going to be a little bit like an editorial meeting of 508, so super compelling stuff. I just want to talk about some different topics that we may want to talk about in the next couple months and think them through.
Or not.
We're going to be thinking things through aloud on today's show.
Things through.
How are you enjoying your summer?
So far, so good. The summer's actually been gorgeous. Right after a pretty grim spring, lots of rain, kind of cold and whatnot. I mean, the last couple of weeks have been absolutely amazing. Not much to complain about.
It's good weather.
Yeah.
The first thing of the 10 things I have on here is cuts of the Telegram and Gazette.
They happened.
We had, I guess, a few dozen people cut from the TNG. Again, we're not going to even cover these. This is such a meta show.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to try to follow the fates of the Telegram and Gazette in recent years. For a few years, I used to be really interested in the Auto Bureau of Circulation statistics until I realized that they changed their measurement system so much from circulation period to circulation period. I don't think you could really in good conscience compare them, or at least I didn't learn anything. Basically, I just learned, like, based on the way that they've rejiggered the stats or the way they're going to count circulation, the Telegram now has more or less circulation than it did 6 months ago.
Right.
But that's just based on, because they keep changing the formula. Very frustrating. So it's been fascinating seeing like a bunch of financial and circulation data come out of the TNG from its being sold and then resold in recent months. I think that the piece of information I want to try to figure out about the TNG is, has this had an impact on the end news consumer? Because when you see a list of people and you see that Leah Lampson and all these other people were like go from the paper, as a person at home, it's hard to figure out what impact that has. If you worked for the Telegram, I'm sure you would have a very clear idea what it was. But as a consumer, it's hard to figure that out. So I think for the next week, I need to look at the content of the paper. I think I need to be buying the physical paper and use that as a yardstick and see what makes, because there's a ton of stuff that makes it into their website and whatever. Based on what's in the physical paper,
I think you should actually buy the paper and actually use it as a yardstick. You should actually use it as a measuring device. You should measure the paper and use that as your primary form of measurement from here on out. Telegram and Gazette.
I have to confess, even though I sit here on television and on YouTube and pretend like I know something about the Telegram, I don't even know the physical dimensions.
I don't know the dimensions of it at all.
So there's a lot we can learn about the paper this week.
Start buying that again.
I'm gonna check that off of our list for today, unless you got a comment about this.
No, I think it's valid because I mean it's yes, I mean on both sides too. You mentioned the circulation data, and I think that is something that's always in flux because there's obviously a heavy number of people that are using the paper online, and aren't necessarily subscription customers, using their free articles and what have you.
Right.
And yeah, I mean at the end of the day, I mean there's certainly something to be said for talent, institutional knowledge, and whatnot involved in a paper, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the talent and the institutional knowledge that was there is what was providing solid news, and probably dig a little bit further and find out whether or not we've had solid news to begin with.
We will do that digging. Another thing that came out the last couple months is push for a strong mayor. You know this, Brendan. I don't have to tell you this. Probably the viewer at home knows this also, that in Worcester we have a system where the city council, who are elected, themselves hire a city manager who is the executive of the city, who runs the city. We have this, I've had this for a long time, I guess as an anti-corruption thing is why we have this.
Yeah, I mean the planning form of government kind of goes back to the progressive era, and it wasn't just about corruption. I mean the idea was to more or less use technocrats to streamline government, right? I mean, so that you wouldn't have the political pull being the primary driver of government, but you would have critical thinking and data being the driver of government. There's probably an argument to be made that that aspect of the planning form of government never actually made its way. That particular memo never made its way to Worcester. and we have had a system that's probably not too much different than if we had a mayor, right? I mean, the last couple city managers that we have essentially set their own agenda and done their own thing. If you're going to have a planning form of government, the idea would be to have a strong city council that would put forth an agenda for a manager, and whether there was disagreement there, that would hash itself out or whatnot. But the idea was you were just removing that one political component that would be the driving force behind government, being a mayor who could kind of use political muscle or capital to drive his own agenda, his or her own agenda, as opposed to a collective body.
So these days, what with us having a temporary city manager right now, city manager who says he doesn't want to keep doing the job past the 9 months or whatever he said he would do it, people who have been pushing for the strong mayor thing are pushing for the strong mayor thing again, the most credible push in a few years. I am skeptical. I used to think that the strong mayor was a great idea. Now I think it's not particularly a great idea. I think maybe formulating that argument is homework I could do before we do a show about that.
I've always loved the idea of a strong mayor just because it seems to be the most pure exercise in democracy that you can have within the constraints of our form of government, like a representative democracy. But again, with the council that we have, you could probably make an argument that would be the worst thing that could possibly happen. If you have a group of people that don't have the ability to put forth an agenda for the person that they actually hired, how could you have that same group of people then have the fortitude to stand up and do the right thing for the potential of a powerful mayor who might not necessarily be acting in the best interests of the city? To be honest, I think it's one of those things that is now starting to come up only when people have nothing left to talk about. And at the end of the day, the really interesting thing is that the council could just vote for a charter change and push that off to the state legislature to change our charter using a home rule petition.
So we wouldn't even have to have a local
vote
besides the city council.
We create the drama around the whole thing to almost as like a marketing campaign to get people all amped up about it. If the city actually wanted to do it, you could just do it through the city council.
Another thing to talk about is state races. We have a state government, Brendan.
We do have a state government.
Still.
It's located in Boston until the Tidewater.
I thought it was in Springfield. I'm thinking of Illinois.
I'm actually starting to make a pitch. This is an aside, and I apologize for that. I'm starting to make a pitch that resulting from climate change, right? Sea levels are going to rise. Boston is done. Boston is not going to be a viable place to run state government unless it's on board a hovercraft or what have you, or something that would be like.
Hey, undersea base?
It could be an undersea base. Yes, very possible. SpongeBob could be a governor. I think it's actually time, forget the strong mayor stuff. The city of Worcester needs to be positioning itself to be the new state capital once Boston is no longer a geographically viable place for state government to be
Worcester.
seated.
Here's the slogan, Worcester, we're on land.
Those hills are going to come in handy within our lifetimes, and we should put them to good use.
Building a new government on solid ground.
There you go.
That's what it's going to be. So people are running for state races. We never really cover the state races on this show, partially because I don't understand state government. I'm not sure, I never know what the right narrative is. I never know what the right lens is to view state government.
Yeah.
And partially because I feel like it's outside of our purview of being a show about Worcester.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's our state races that we have locally are immensely important, right? I mean, you've got a state senator, Harriet Chandler, who's facing both a primary challenge and then a Republican challenger. You've got 2 contested primaries for sitting state reps, Dan Donahue over in John Frizzolo's former seat up on the Grafton Hill area, and then Mary Keefe being challenged by current city councilor Phil Palmieri for her seat, which essentially starts in this corner of the city and runs up through the east side. I mean, they should be incredibly important races for people to keep an eye on, but I kind of agree with you. I almost feel as though we've ignored them, and a lot of it is just, I don't think they almost have the appearance locally of being just an extra district city councilor race. Like, they're not really the sexiest races to follow. Yeah. They don't bring in a lot of money, they don't bring in a lot of attention, and the campaigns tend to stay very, very low key. I mean, right now you would think that people would be out there, and I know they are out there actually knocking on doors, but the visibility is kind of low for those of us who aren't necessarily on the other side of those doors that are being knocked. So it's hard to really get a sense of what's going on.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, that would, to the extent that we would ever cover this, I feel like my homework would be to try to figure out what would be the issues to talk about. Yep. Like, just as we do with city council races, we perversely decide to focus on the issues, despite the fact that I think not a lot of people vote on issues in that. I don't know if they vote on issues in state races any more than they do in city council or not.
Other parts of the state they do, and again, that's probably where if we were to have a conversation about that, that's probably the stuff that we should be looking at. I mean, you're talking about the people that are involved with the education funding models that come back to the city in terms of funding. I mean, most of the city funds that originate with the state those are the folks that should be lobbying for them. Knowing what they stand for, what issues are important to them, would seem to be immensely important for all of us here, considering that we are still part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Soon to be
the capital. Capital city.
You know, I want to hear this, like, you know, at the next political convention when they're like, and now, from your next capital, Worcester, Massachusetts, Brendan Milliken.
There it is.
I want to hear this. Panhandling. There's been a little bit of stuff going on vis-a-vis panhandling in the courts. You know, Worcester, we had our, a year and a half ago, we had our new anti-panhandling ordinances come in. And they've definitely kept people from doing like fundraising, like Cub Scouts and things from doing fundraising on street corners. I don't know if the Cub Scouts ever did that, other school kids did. Still, panhandlers, I think sooner or later we'll get some statistics of whether or not the number of people standing on a street holding the sign has gone up or down. I feel like anecdotally, it probably depends on which street corners you pass. There's some weekends where it seems like there's a million guys. The other day, actually, it was very funny. I was walking across Lincoln Square, right in front of the police station. And as I was standing on the median, there was a dude on the median holding a sign that said, you know, homeless, hungry, looking for work, whatever it said. And as I was standing there waiting for the light to change for me to go from the median to the next spot, a cop pulled up and got the guy to get out of there. So it is still like an actual thing that at times, I mean, the median is like a very clear, like you can't just stand on the median and hang out. But it still is being enforced, and there's still, the number of panhandlers is presumably going up or down one direction or another. I'm sure every issue facing the city of Worcester has been solved as a result of this panhandling ordinance, and I look forward to seeing the data come forth. One thing I need to do is I need to go in front, I feel like once the statistics come out, part of me thinks this would be being a jerk, and part of it not, is to go in front of the city council and just, because I spoke in front of them so many times before this, just make some sort of comment vis-a-vis how many panhandlers there are. Like, if it hasn't impacted them, I should really go up there and be like, you know what, I was really concerned how this was going to impact, like, you were saying this is about public safety. I was saying this was probably about trying to hassle a certain class of poor people. Sure. Yeah. Apparently it's not hassling them. It is keeping kids from, like, theoretically getting hit by a car while raising money for a school trip. And they were kind of annoying to begin with, so maybe there's maybe it's a net positive. Maybe I'm crazy to think that this is a problem. Anyway, drones is another one. Drones are awesome. There's people with drones, civilian drones in the city now. You can look at these YouTubes. They're crashing them into Kelly Square. Crashing them into Kelly Square. There has been some chatter heard on the police band vis-a-vis drones. Not clear. I think it potentially involves these civilian drones. Okay. It potentially involves some sort of official drones, but I don't want to contribute to any kind of rumor around this. No, that would be irresponsible. Because everything that I've heard makes me think that there's probably police chatter about civilian drones. Yeah. But the fact that there's civilian drones around, it sort of makes me feel like there's got to be some kind of drones from some bigger organizations. There's got to be something somewhere, right? I mean, it's a big sky. Corporate drones, non-profit drones. I actually hope that if the Worcester Police Department goes aerial, that they start with like a nice kite or something low, just low tack. Don't jump feet first right in. Police kites. You've already got people that seem to know what they're doing, crashing them into very busy intersections. Just take it slow. All right. Well, drones is an exciting. I feel like drones is a topic that's so much in the air nowadays. That was an accidental pun, sorry guys. South Worcester Industrial Park. Still there. You know, have you followed that there's been some changes with this South Worcester Industrial Park? I don't buy it. Let me know when it's completed. Well, this is an actual thing, is that, so the South Worcester Industrial Park, boy, we did a show there. It's hard to describe where it is. It's off of Southbridge Street? Yeah, the Cambridge Street, Southbridge Street area where it kind of intersects. It's Canterbury Street. Okay. Yeah. It's like an area that you don't really think about what's there because there's nothing there. Yeah. It's just a bunch of vacant lots. The city has been trying to deal with this place for like almost 20 years now. Nicole Apostle had an amazing blog post a few years ago talking about how the Telegram and Gazette every 18 months or so would have an article saying, the South Worcester Industrial Park, finally something's happened. Like clockwork, finally something's happening. So we'll say here today, finally something's happening with the South Worcester Industrial Park. The city has decided to go ahead and reclassify it to some sort of economic development zone or something like that, which basically means that they no longer have to have like a big public bidding process in order to sell the South Worcester Industrial Park to somebody. Does that mean that we could potentially bid on it? Well, I think it means that we could go up and just talk to the city manager and be like, listen. I think we should do that. Listen. I got $8 here. I could get more. Yeah. Listen. That could be our new studio.
I mean, that would be a more economic development than is currently taking place.
It would be a large studio.
It would be a huge
We
studio,
could put a
but
tent.
that show was actually a lot of fun. That was
It was educational. It's educational to go to these places.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's a change. I think that's sort of like the.
It'd make a great paintball course.
I feel like sort of like the marketing thing. The way to make the thing that people would say to make it credible that it's a new era is to say that this is the same status that I think was used to get Gateway Park.
Yeah.
Built.
Okay.
When Gateway Park is this thing that used to be a vacant lot and now is like some kind of WPI related office park.
Yeah.
Adjacent to kind of near downtown,
Yeah.
adjacent to WPI. So this is a similar deal they're going to try to do with Southwestern Industrial Park to get something there rather than a vacant lot.
That makes sense. I mean, but I think we also have to remember too that there was actually a company that owned it for a while, and that company has gone off to be one of the largest manufacturers of edible products in the medical marijuana industry. Pharmasphere.
How is Pharmasphere? So Pharmasphere had bid $1 for it because they were going to grow an industrial.
I mean, think about that.
Yes, right.
You get $8. All they had was one.
I could buy this whole city for $8.
You're the
Brendan.
future of Worcester, the new state capital.
They were going to
streets after you, Mike Benedetti.
They're going to name a street for every letter of my name. That's how many streets I'm going to own. They were going to grow industrial petunias. Periwinkles. Periwinkles. They were going to have, because there's some sort of drug they were supposedly going to get from periwinkles.
Well, that's what they told the city that they were doing. But I mean, since then they've gone on with a bunch of mergers to become a company known as Medical Marijuana LLC, and their attention is elsewhere. But I think what it was, we've talked about this before. It seems as though that they thought Massachusetts was going to be further along in terms of passing regulation allowing for medical marijuana and we actually were. And we're still probably in the first 50% of states to do so, but a little bit slower to get to that point. And it seems like they were trying to get into Massachusetts before that happened, and since moved back to San Diego, I believe is where they're based now. And yeah, it's a huge company now. Could have been right here. Could have been the home of medical marijuana.
Well, it's not the city. The city did not stand in the way of them doing that. They just decided not to do it, right?
Well, I mean, I guess technically the state and we did by not passing laws legalizing medical marijuana earlier.
See, this periwinkle thing was just kind of a bait and switch.
Well, I mean, maybe there was money to be had in periwinkles, but from what I'm reading, there is more money to be had in legalized marijuana.
Well, Brendan,
call me a cynic.
I feel like it's a new era for the Southwestern Industrial Park. I just want to go on record as saying that
$8.
$8. The city has, I don't know. We get cynical and we get frustrated with things like the ice rink, City Square. These things do happen eventually.
Where's the ice rink? Is that
behind City Hall?
Oh, that ice rink. I thought you meant when we were talking about the big indoor skating.
The one that we're going to take at the
Oval.
library parking lot.
No, the Oval is actually there with decent music.
It's a good spot.
Yeah.
Marijuana is the next thing on my list.
Oh, cool.
Where are we? Where are we with marijuana these days?
Us? You mean you?
Not you. I know. We're in the same place we were always. Where's the city? Where's the state?
The city. So it's interesting, actually. The city is not currently going to get a license. A company from Colorado called Good Chemistry had been initially awarded a license to operate in the city of Worcester.
Right.
They had.
We did a show from the place they were going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And they screwed up a bunch of their paperwork. We discussed that on the show. They made some errors on the paperwork, and the state probably made. I think in the end, it'll end up being the right call. Was they pushed them out of the running because of the errors, and the errors were simple. It's probably nothing that really should have hurt them, the company, but. If you want to give the impression that you're doing things the right way,
you got to do things the right way.
So yeah, the state is still working on their guidelines, and I don't know. Hopefully, sometime this decade, that will come about. I mean, to be perfectly frank, it seems like the state is going to be lined up for another ballot question at the earliest, and likely 2016. To coincide with the presidential race to fully legalize, legalize recreational marijuana in the state. So the way things are going, I mean, it's possible that we might only have medical marijuana for a year before full retail marijuana starts hitting the streets. But
we're not going to get a dispensary in Worcester anytime soon.
It doesn't seem that way. I haven't not heard otherwise, but I've been wrong before.
I've seen a lot of head shops popping up over the
Everywhere.
last six to 9 months.
And I think a lot of it is a combination of this stuff, the e-cigarette thing, where there's a big market there, and then also glassware and vaporizers and whatnot for plant material on the medical marijuana side, just preparing for that. Because even if we don't have a dispensary, I mean, you'll still be able to get licensed to be a user of medical marijuana, and you can get licensed as a caregiver, which would mean that you could grow, inside your home or whatnot for a patient. So there still will be an industry
in the city.
Will be
doing.
It just won't probably be of the scale that people were expecting initially.
What would be the closest dispensary to Worcester then?
That's a great question. I'd have to look into that. I believe there's one in Worcester County, but I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I don't want to give false information.
We have to look that up. Yeah. I'm not a marijuana user, but this marijuana is like one of these issues that it just seems like for 20 years it's just been like, when are we just gonna get our act together and try to do something more sane around this drug?
No, yeah,
and it's finally, it seems like it's happening.
Yeah, it's I'm actually starting to get really bummed out while it's happening. It's because I remember being in high school, and I've always been, as long as it's been an issue, going back in the 90s, a huge proponent of full decriminalization of marijuana. The medical, I think, is a nice starting point, but I think that the only thing on a long enough timeline is just ending prohibition. Prohibition doesn't work. Personally, I would go take it a step further and say the entire war on drugs needs to be rethought from a practical perspective. But for the marijuana issue, I've always been a huge fan of just straight up decriminalization. Now that it seems like, you look at polling, it seems like everybody on the planet, under the age of 60 is in favor of full decriminalization. The states that are allowing medical, at least, are just, racking up one after another. It seems like everybody's on the same page now, with the exception of a handful of teetotalers that, in many cases, also believe that alcohol prohibition should never have been ended. Yet stuff is happening so slow on the government side that I'm starting to get kind of bummed out and cynical about the whole thing. It's like, how much of what actually defines a consensus anymore, where you actually move forward with something that, on the science side, people say, yeah, no problem there, and then on the public side, everyone's like, bring it on, and then government just stands in the middle, seemingly insanely confused about how to go about doing something. It's like, just do it.
It's one of these. It seems like it's one of these issues where I would say now the people who are in favor of prohibition are probably a minority for sure, right?
On the marijuana side or in general? Well, yeah, no, absolutely. It's now a minority of the overall nationwide, and depending on the state that you're in, or the demographic of the city and whatnot. There's definitely some changes in those numbers, but nationwide, the majority of the country is now in favor of decriminalization, or at least starting with the medical side.
And even among voters, we've seen people voting in favor of medical marijuana. Yeah. In this state.
And the really cool thing to watch too, and I think it's typical because the majority of people who are voting age and we polled about such thing are now people who they themselves went through DARE programs and whatnot, and had hammered into your head the idea that this was an awful thing that you should be shamed for. Keeping that in mind, the most interesting thing is watching how, when a state passes a law like medical marijuana or whatnot, the polling numbers in favor go through the roof.
Right.
The stigma attached to the drugs seems to be the thing that actually keeps people from acknowledging they're actually in favor of supporting it. And that does seem to be one of the things that's just slowing down just opening the floodgates sort of thing, because I think there's still a segment of the population that closeted totally in favor of decriminalization, but are waiting for some sign from the outside world to make sure that it's okay to say that the police aren't going to show up and sack you because you're in favor of changing a silly law.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure
most police, I think, are in favor of changing the silly law.
I'm sure too. It's the kind of the thing something like same-sex marriage, where people will say, "Well, this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and society's going to fall apart." And then you see in this state, we live in Worcester. We could argue that it's fallen apart to a certain extent, but is it because of same-sex marriage? I don't think there's any.
Same-sex marriage is the reason South Worcester Industrial Park is yet to be sold. No,
there's no change from. We legalized same-sex marriage in 2004, and is there something that happened between 2003 and 2005 that we can point to and say there it is? This is when everything went to hell.
No. It does take, I think, something. The dam just doesn't open up, right? I think you need a little crack and some water to flow through before people realize, oh well, yeah, that isn't so bad after all. The people on the talking heads on TV were lying to me. Yeah. To get to that point.
I can understand people
feeling. But it is
feeling
frustrating. I think is.
I can understand people feeling like, maybe people hearing an argument in favor of marijuana decriminalization and saying, yeah, but do we want to take that risk? But then once you see another state like Colorado or whatever take that risk, then I think that same person looks at it and says, all right, well, you're right. My fears maybe are not grounded.
Yeah, no, and you look at Colorado, and their biggest problem right now is they don't know what to do with all of this cash because of weird banking regulations that still make it difficult, although it's changing slowly, to actually deposit that money in federally insured banks and whatnot.
We need to go down there with some paperwork about the South Worcester Industrial Park.
We can store all the money at the South Worcester Industrial Park.
Somebody could buy it.
Yeah.
Maybe I bet you
this just a big cash storage facility for Colorado weed money.
I haven't looked into this like whole economic development zone, all the ins and the outs of it, besides that it will let you just buy stuff from the city manager without a public bidding. But I bet you it also would let people buy stuff with just a suitcase full of cash, and rather than going through whatever other hoops and things.
That might make sense.
If so,
yeah,
this is our solution. We got a couple more things. Vegetarian food. People are working on this vegan restaurant in Worcester called Chickpea. They have a sort of a pop-up type situation where they're inside of Spiritual Haze, the hookah bar, right now in the afternoons, and they're looking to get their own space. There's another vegetarian restaurant that was, today I heard, maybe not going to be opening up in Main South sometime soon, but there's multiple people who are like really seriously trying to open up additional vegetarian restaurants in Worcester.
You know what I'm most excited about with Chickpea?
What?
Is people have been talking to me about this concept now for, it's probably been like a year or so that like I've been here, people have been talking to me about it, I've been hearing people talking about it, and yet at no point have I ever stopped anyone to actually ask and to explain what it is that they're actually doing. So Julia, if you're watching, next time we see each other, probably at the gym or whatnot, just explain to me what you actually have going on.
It's a cafe.
Well, which makes perfect sense, right? But I always find myself a part of a conversation about something that I don't actually know what is taking place, and that's continuing right now on the show.
This is a homework we're giving to Julia Cohen. Explain Brendan over the next week. Explain to Brendan about.
Doesn't have to be over the next week, just some point in time.
All right.
Thank you.
The last thing I want to talk about is maker spaces. I just got some emails this week about people doing maker space projects at a WPI. You know, we talked about maker spaces and co-working a little bit on the show.
Yeah.
I think the only co-working space we ever featured on the show was one in Nairobi, Kenya.
Yeah.
So we should probably go visit some of these maker spaces and co-working spaces in the next couple of months.
Yeah, the co-working in particular too, man. The conversations that seem to be happening more frequently now on places like Reddit and whatnot about all of the professional co-working spaces in Boston, and how they are starting to redefine what it means to be a company, and not actually going out and renting offices, but just letting a corporation build inside of co-working spaces and whatnot.
Yeah.
I know these places do exist around here, but it seems like it's something that should be better advertised. I would probably put that on the sort of thing that maybe the city council and the manager's office should be talking about more, letting potential entrepreneurs in the city know that these things actually exist and are there as resources. But maybe you and I can pick up the slack and do a better job of informing both myself and the rest of the city about what is going on in all of these spots.
Maybe we can. Co-working spaces kind of remind me of these other things where somebody is taking a large capital item like an office, and then subdividing it and sharing it. Another example would be Uber and these sort of like Airbnb. People know what Uber is, which is where you use your phone to like basically get a gypsy cab. Airbnb, which is where you use the internet to help you rent a room in somebody's house. All of these things, somewhat following afoul of local regulations, but also somewhat being the next wave.
Yeah.
I was really struck. I mean, I know so many people who've used Airbnb. It seems like such a great thing. I'm aware of at least one mayor who, when visiting Worcester for the Democratic State Convention last month, was staying in Worcester via Airbnb.
You mentioned that. Did you find out who it was yet? What town?
I'm not gonna rat this mayor out, because I feel like you're possibly violating some sort of lodging law or something. I just want to say, I think that is awesome.
Yeah, no, totally cool. When you told me that, I was kind of blown away, because you think hotel room or whatnot, but that. Yeah. Why don't we do more things like that? And I think the reason more people don't do things like that is because they don't know that they exist, right? I mean, once that conversation becomes the norm. And I mean, you and I have been talking about things like co-working spaces, it seems like for years on the show, but the reality of them existing in parallel to the average person who goes to an office every day. If you go to an office every day, next time you're sitting under those fluorescent lights, ask yourself what the hell you're doing in that office, right? I mean, you could be 40 miles closer to home instead of driving to Boston every day or whatever the case may be, and working out of a shared space that provides you with all the same resources, just not so close to your boss.
We call it the cloud. It's called being in the cloud.
It's waiting for you out there, Worcester.
Brendan, thanks for another great show.
Thanks for having me. Look at that thing.
I'm Mike Benedetti. I've seen so many crazy limos today. There was a Humvee limo. This is the 508 show. We'll be back hopefully more or less every week. We changed our schedule so that we're taping about a week ahead of our TV air date, so the news will be a little bit maybe better thought out. Talk to you next week. Bye.